Okay, well, at this point, it looks like most people have gotten into the room who are ready to come in. We'll probably have some more trickle in, but I wanted to say welcome. Thank you so much for being here at our Halloween event, What Are We Afraid Of? I'm very excited to have you here. My name is Sarah Faulkner. I'm Program Manager at Humanities Washington, which I'll tell you more about tonight. But I'm just so excited to have you here as we celebrate the art of scary stories. If you are interested in closed captioning for this event, you can find that button at the bottom of your screen. So if you'd like captions to appear, we do have that enabled. So you can click at the bottom of your screen for live transcript. So again, my name is Sarah Faulkner. I'm the Program Manager at Humanities Washington. We're a nonprofit whose mission is to open minds and to bridge divides by creating spaces for people to explore different perspectives. In addition to live events like this, we also run a speakers bureau, poet laureate program, and reading programs for kids across the state, where people are allowed to come, hear a new thought, learn something new, and most importantly, to engage in conversation with each other. I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging that we're presenting this program from the traditional and occupied lands of the Coast Salish people. I ask that if you're participating tonight, wherever you are, to reflect on the land that you are on and to acknowledge the ancestral and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples. So if you're interested in learning more about programs that Humanities Washington has, you can find us at humanities.org. We have a calendar where you're able to see upcoming events. We have some great talks next week about the history of audio technology and about the gentrification of rural Washington. So if you like hearing these new opinions and ideas tonight, we invite you to stay in touch with us afterwards. And you'll receive an email from me tomorrow thanking you for attending, asking your opinions on the event, but reminding you that there's more to come. So without further ado, well, I guess before further ado, I want to remind you that tonight is a recorded event. So we'll have some Q&A. Obviously, it's a webinar, so you're not on camera, your voices won't be there, but our panelists are going to take some questions after the event through a Q&A box that we have at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So at any point, do feel free to send in a question, and once we get to the Q&A part of the event, we'll be able to take your questions. So the way it's going to work tonight is I'll have each of our fantastic Scary Story panelists introduce themselves to you. And then each of them are going to tell you a story. They might introduce it a bit, tell you a bit about its origins. They'll tell the story. Then we'll have a conversation with each other about how we heard these stories, why we think we still tell these stories, both in specific cultures, but also why as humans, we just love scary stories so much. So we'll get the chance to chat, but then we're going to welcome questions from the audience in the second half of the program. So we're planning to wrap up no later than 8:30 tonight. And I think with that, I'm just double checking my checklist to make sure I told you everything that I'd like to. And yeah, I think we're ready to start. So I'm going to start with introductions of our fantastic panelists. So I'm going to pass it over to Owen Oliver to begin.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you, Humanities Washington, for having me. Excuse me. Fahayam, Owen, Nika, Yahal. Hello, everyone. My name is Owen Oliver. I come from the people of the Lower Columbia River, the Salish Sea, and the Southwest Pueblos of Isleta. However, I'm enrolled Quinault from the West Coast side of Washington. I grew up in Seattle, went to the University of Washington, studied American Indian Studies and political science, and now work as kind of a arts and culture consultant in Seattle, and just bringing indigeneity into the space and the planning process, of the city. When I initially got asked to, be on this panel, I was thinking, oh, what, indigenous, Coast Salish stories, like how we use them. So just super excited to be here, and just, yeah, we got a wonderful show for you guys. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. I'll pass it off to Dr. Lauren Poyer now.
Hi, my name is Lauren Poyer. Thank you, Sarah and Humanities Washington, for inviting me to speak, tell you a little Icelandic story later on. I am an assistant teaching professor of Scandinavian Studies at the University of Washington here in Seattle. I'm a medievalist by trade, so my own research is Old Norse literature, especially produced in Iceland in the 13th and 14th centuries. But a lot of my teaching, I teach most of the medieval Scandinavian courses here at UW, so Scandinavian mythology, sagas of the Vikings, Old Norse language. And I'm really interested in my teaching in working with students to see what kinds of relationships medieval peoples had with their own local landscapes and just how much they understood the land and the resources around them to have their own wills and their own agency, and how much medieval peoples really understood themselves to be part of larger interconnected systems. So that was when Sarah contacted me about participating. I said, oh, I want to tell a story about land. So no spoilers.
Thank you, Lauren, so much. And last but not least, we have Nancy Salguero-McKay.
Hi, my name is Nancy. I'm the director of the Highland Heritage Museum. We are located in the Highland area, which is Y Center, Burien, St. Technomaly Park, and a little bit of Des Moines. And the museum is located specifically in Burien. I've been in the field for more than 20 years. Very passionate about inclusion, diversity. I'm passionate about being able to have those dialogues and share those stories with each other. Our cultures or heritage is always something that is being passed down to generations. And I think that this session is more about that. It's like what has been when it's been passed on from one generation to the next one. And for us, I think that one of the reasons why Sarah contacted us is that we just created an event. It's called La Noche de Leyendas, which means the Night of Legends. And we did that in September. And I'm from Mexico City. I'm an immigrant. And so if you hear this funny accent, that's the reason why. So yes, I'm growing up in Mexico City and then coming to the States, being able to see how different the cultures are, and then also at the same time how similar we are. And so the scary things, I think we all can relate to, that fear, that emotion of I don't like this, it's so scary. And I think we have way more things in common than differences. And I think that at the end of this panel presentation, for me, in a personal level, I will be able to say we have more things in common than differences, and we all have different voices and different perspectives. But my side of this, I won't talk much, but yes, I'm just excited to be here. Thank you, Humanities Washington. Thank you, Sarah, for allowing us to be part of this wonderful panel.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you again so much to the three of you for being here and for sharing your stories and your ideas about these stories with us. And I know you're all excited to hear some of these stories, so I will not make you wait any longer. So I'll pass it off to Owen for our first story.
Awesome. Super excited. And when thinking about this and what story to bring, to share with you all, I was thinking about, stories that I was told, as a Coast Salish kid, along, the forest to the mountains to the seas. And a lot of them, that invoked fear were the story around this basket ogress, basket woman, Zunukwa, wild woman of the wilderness. That's how we knew her. And I'm going to tell you the story, but I'm going to tell you it in two different regions. So I'm going to tell you the short story from the Upper Skagit people. And then afterwards, I'm going to tell you the story from the Tulalip people. And you can kind of see the differences as I read them. But, really focusing on that, this is a story that's told from the Pacific Northwest throughout all different tribes. And everybody who says it a little bit differently, but I think you'll get why. So this is the Basket Ogress, told by Louise Anderson in 1962. And this was translated from Lushootseed to English. In the time of the legends, it seemed that the children were sent to gather together by the shores of the salt water. When they arrived, they were hungry, so they built a fire to roast their salmon. They roasted their salmon. When it was cooked, they divided it into little pieces, one for each children. Little Hunchback was given the tail. He was told, "That tail part will be your share, Little Hunchback." Little Hunchback felt so insulted. He hollered, Come on, ogress, come on. I have just been given the tail of the roasted salmon. The frightened children said, be quiet, little hunchback, be quiet. The basket ogress might come for us here. Again, they roasted salmon. 4 times they roasted their salmon, and it always was just the tail given to the little hunchback. Now he thought, I'm gonna holler. Come down to the water, basket ogress. These children just gave me the tail. Be quiet, little hunchback. The basket ogress might come to us. Let her come. If she comes, you'll be the first one she takes, little hunchback. Oh no, I'll always be on the top. And then he hollered again. Come on, basket ogress, come down to the water. Again, the frightened children plead. Don't call the basket ogress, she might come. Suddenly, when they heard something making noises, it was the basket ogress cane. She had deer hoofs tied there, and they rattled as she walked. See there, basket ogress is coming. No, don't call her, no. They were grabbed, put into a big clam basket, and it was on the back of the basket ogress. She put in another child. Little hunchback squirmed around, always getting himself up to the top as the ogress threw more children into her basket. This clam basket of the ogresses was made entirely of snakes, just snakes. There were 11 children, including the little hunchback. There were 11. She arrived. She sang as she happily built a hot fire and placed rocks there to heat. And when the rocks were hot, the basket ogress just pushed, and she sang a different song. Take me out of the fire, children, please. Take me out of the fire, children, please. Take me out of the fire, children, please. The children answered, we are taking you out of the fire. We are taking you out of the fire, but the flames and the rocks are so hot. Put out the fire, children, put out the fire. No, basket ogress, we just can't get it out. We tried to put in vain to put it out. Basket ogress again sang her request 4 times. Remove me from the fire, children, please. 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 The happy children danced around as she sang. They sang in reply, we are removing you, basket ogress, but we can't seem to get you out. The fire burned until it went out. They tried in vain to get the basket ogress out. Little hunchback ran. He went down to the water. He got there. He wanted to be in the bow of the canoe. No, little hunchback, no. You get the middle in the stern, but no. They didn't want to get little hunchback on board. Where they were going. Little hunchback threw rocks at him. He'd fix them. Their paddles would break. The children arrived where they'd come from, and they were asked, what did you do, children? What did you do with your younger brother? They were all women at that place. There were no men among them. We left little hunchback because he wouldn't listen to us when we tried to stop him. Oh, okay. It was all right for you to leave. It was all right that you left him. Now his grandfather went out to look for little hunchback. He put his grandson on board, and as they traveled through the swamp grass and reeds that grew there, when he arrived home, he asked the children, why did you leave your younger brother? They answered, well, it is because he called the basket ogress, and she would have had us burned. This is why we got angry with him, and this is why we left him. That is the end of the story. This is the basket ogress told by Angie James at Tulalip in 1952. A group of children knew a woman who had lived alone near the river. The children knew that she was lonely and they wanted to go visit her. When they asked her parents for permission to go, her parents said, no, you can't go because that's too far. The giant woman might just get you when you're away from home. The giant woman is powerful. She put you in her huge clam basket. The children ignored the parents. When they got into a canoe, went on their way to visit the lonely woman. When the night came, they made themselves camp on the other side of the river. They filled a fire and cooked their supper. One of the children was a hunchback. When the children divided their supper, Hunchback was given the tail part. They traveled for several days. Each evening they would stop to camp overnight, eat their supper. Every time they would give the Hunchback a tail part for the share. Hunchback finally said, "If you folks are really going to give me the tail part, well, I'd really have the tips. I will call the giant woman." When that night came again, they stopped to camp and eat their supper. It was still the tail part which he was given. Now Hunchback hollered, "Come downhill, giant woman. Come downhill, giant woman. It's just the tail part that I am given by my playmates." The giant woman heard right away, "Oh, there is something hollering at me." She put her basket on her back and she walked. She was a huge person, this giant woman. She chewed on everything as she traveled. She arrived where the children were. Right away, she began to pick up the children one by one and put them into her basket. She grabbed Hunchback first and put him in there. When all the children were up in the basket, the giant woman walked. She carried these children upland. Suddenly, she could feel something catch at her bag. She thought, "Oh, it must have been Hunchback that caught on to something." Hunchback squirmed until he managed to get himself up on top of the other children. Each time he came to a leaning tree, he tried to grab a hold of it. No, he couldn't do it. On the fourth try, he did. The giant woman went on walking. When she arrived at her home with the children, she immediately gathered rocks and placed them on a fire to heat. When they were good and hot, she began to take the children out of her basket. And when she found the Hunchback was missing, "Oh, Hunchback isn't here. Where is he?" He managed to run away. Giant woman ran. Hunchback was in a canoe, shoving it off the shore. He had a paddle with holes in it. The paddle had holes. When Giant woman threw rocks at him, he held up his paddle and the rocks went through. Hunchback paddled hard. Each time she threw a rock at it, he raised his paddle and the rocks just went through. Giant woman gave up. She went home and put on more rocks on her fire. She wanted the rocks to be very hot to cook her supper fast. The children huddled together and began to talk to each other. They watched the giant woman heating up all those rocks on the fire. Giant woman noticed and said to them, What are you children saying?" The children carefully answered, "Oh, it's just you. You were so happy for that you were heating the rocks. We would like to sing and dance before you cooked us there." The giant woman was so flattering at their request and said, "All right." The children said, "You will dance." She proudly said, "I will dance." Now Giant woman danced. She sang as she danced. "The children will be roasted on the rocks. The children will be roasted on the rocks. The children will be roasted on the rocks." The children said, "Oh my, but your song is so nice. Sing some more." And again, the giant woman sang and danced. The oldest and strongest of the children were making plans. "We had better push her onto the hot rocks." Giant woman said, "What are you children saying?" And they cautiously answered, "Oh, we're just so happy for you to be happy for us." They whispered to each other when they came near us, "Let's all push her in." Oh, Giant woman was coming closer and singing, "The children will be roasted on the rocks. The children will be roasted on the rocks. The children will be roasted on the rocks." And as she came close to them, all of the oldest, strongest children pushed her right onto the hot rocks as she fell. She screamed, "Remove me, children, remove me from the fire, and I will return you to your home." One of the children said, "Get a forked stick, and we shall remove grandmother from the fire. We shall remove her, get a forked stick." However, the children took a forked stick, and everyone pressed her onto the hot rocks until she was stuck there, roasting. This is the end of the story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Owen. Fantastic. I am very excited to talk about that later in the night. Well, for our next story, we are moving over to Iceland. So I'll pass this off to Lauren.
Right, thank you. So my story comes to us in four variants that were collected by two different folklorists who were active in the 19th century and the early 20th century in Iceland. So with 4 different versions of the story. Those folklorists are Jón Árnason and Sigfús Sigfússon. And so I'm going to tell you my master version of 2 of those versions condensed down into one. I'm going to tell you the story of the unsolved killing of Gunnlaug, Gunnlaugur Árnason, which happened in Iceland in 1749. The killing of Gunnlaug happened in the east of Iceland in 1749, near a valley called Ravenkell Valley, Hrafnkelsdalur. But the real story actually starts 300 years before, in that same valley, when the Black Plague came to Iceland. The plague came to Iceland much later than it came to the rest of Scandinavia, but when it did come, it swept through the lowland valleys where people lived on their farms, and people fled. Some of them fled into the next valley over and carried with them the plague. Other people fled up into the mountains, into the highlands in Iceland, where it is too high and too cold for anything to grow. One of those farmers took his entire family into the highlands, and for 3 years, each year, he would send down a single man to survey the valley and find out if the plague had finally passed them over. The first year he sent a man, there was still plague. The second year he sent a man, there was still plague. And on the 3rd year, he sent his son, Sigurður. And when Sigurður came down into the valley to their family farm, he found no plague, but he also found no living man. He found only bodies strewn over the whole farm. The valley had become a cursed place. There was a wound over that land. But the plague had passed them by, so the families moved down from the highlands back into the valley, and almost 300 years passed peacefully in that valley before Gunnlaug came of age. Gunnlaug was a very well-dressed man. He was very popular. He was the talk of the valley. He wore buttons on his shirt, which he had imported from Denmark. That was very fancy. Most everyone else in Iceland at the time would tie their shirts with string ties, but Gunnlaug liked how he looked, and he liked that other people liked how he looked, and so he wore a button shirt. He loved a woman in the valley, Solveig, and he would visit her often, and she enjoyed his company as well. But he was not the only person who was interested in Solveig. There was another man in the valley who loved her too. So one evening, the night before Easter, Gunnlaug went out in the dark to tend to the sheep. And he went alone, and he went unafraid, because tomorrow was Easter. So that night, Christ would be rising from the dead, and there was nothing to fear. But in the morning, when Solveig and all of the rest of the people of the valley went to church to celebrate Easter, Gunnlaug didn't come with them. He was nowhere to be found, and he continued to be nowhere to be found all throughout the day. He never came home to his farm, and he never came to visit Solveig. The people of the valley at first didn't do anything, but Solveig was so upset and so worried that at her request, they put together a search party to look for Gunnlaug. And they followed his footprints in the snow. They knew about where his sheep might be, so they knew where to look. And they found his footprints, and they followed them down the valley. They found where Gunnlaug had sat down on a log, and then they saw that he had stood up and run at great speed away from the log. The footprints in the snow became further and further apart, as if he were sprinting faster and faster, until suddenly they stopped. And in place of footprints is just the shape of a body being dragged through the snow. So they follow the drag marks, and at the end of the valley, they find Gunnlaug, or rather they find his body. And really not even that. They found pieces of his body. He had been dismembered. His arms and legs were across the clearing, and his heart had been cut out from his chest. And in fact, it was not there. Whatever had killed Gunnlaug had taken his heart with them. So the search party gathered up all of the pieces of Gunnlaug's body as best they could, and they brought them to the church where Solveig had been waiting. And when she saw his body, she wept. And one of the versions of the story tells us that she was never the same. No one in the valley would tell how Gunnlaug died, but some people thought they knew. For one man said he saw a troll run into a burial mound near the end of the valley, and he knew that that troll was Gunnlaug's bane. That man, Eiríkur, had second sight. For another, Gunnlaug's love, Solveig, her father wasn't too upset at Gunnlaug's death. That's how it goes, he says in two versions of the story. That's how it goes with those boys and their buttons. And for the third, Gunnlaug's rival, that other man who loved Solveig, he was run out of town by the rest of the people in the valley. And it's said that no one really quite cared what happened to him. So Gunnlaug's death is still unsolved. And that is the story of Gunnlaug Arnarsson. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Fantastic. Already making some connections between the two, as different as they are. So thank you so much. For our final story, I am going to pass it over to Nancy.
I see in the chat that somebody asked where I'm from. I'm from Mexico City. I was born and raised there. And so I am telling the story of La Llorona. And it is, the more I was researching, the more interesting it got, because it's just so much information about it. And I was able to break it up in three areas. One is the pre-Hispanic version, which is many of those. Second, the colonial version. And then what you see today, the way I'm dressed up, my outfit is more of the Day of the Dead. But if you type in a YouTube video, La Llorona, in a song, you will see many different videos being sung with this type of format. Now, the legend has many different versions all throughout Mexico, even Spanish speaking, they've been transforming in multiple versions. And so it's not like, oh, it's just one or two or three, like literally hundreds of versions of that. But there's several, on the several stories, there's a lot of common ground. And I'm going to be just pointing out those common factors. One is that La Llorona means in English, the weeping woman. And so crying, weeping, sorrow, wailing, that's what it's saying. La Llorona is the lady who is weeping and desperately seeking her children. So the first version is the pre-Hispanic one, talking about Mexico City. That's the one that I'm more familiarized with. Mexico City is built in a lake. You may think it's really weird, but if you think about Venice is, in a body of water. The same thing with Mexico City. And so at that time, before the Spanish came, there was this Venice format, and I made it sound so you can actually understand, kind of visualize what I'm referring to. And so there is the version that says that this woman, in despair, her lover not being with her, she killed her kids. And with that, she just drowned them into the lake, because it was the lake. The whole city was founded on the lake. So that's version one. Version, oh, many of that. The second group of the colonial ones is right after the conquest. When you walk around Mexico City in the colonial part of it, you see that is kind of a replica of Europe. All the Spanish trying to conquest that culture. And so between these colonial streets, seems like it was this lady that, once again, is her heart is broken, either because of love, or either because of she lost her husband, or either because somebody left her. But it was the same common thing, that she's alone with her children. And she, out of despair, she kills them. She drowns them. And then she's also, her punishment is to because she kills herself too. Her punishment for her crime was always wandering, always hailing, always in pain, and just relieving and crying. So that's what it is this chilling. I mean, when you hear somebody crying, that's one thing, but when you hear somebody wailing, weeping, I think wailing is a little higher. So you got crying, and then you got weeping, and then you got wailing. It's like, that's what it is. It's a level of just pure despair. And then it's so scary that that it just really, really affects you. And so there's not just the voice that you hear, it's not just her wailing and screaming, but it's about looking for her children. And so when parents wanted to put the kids to sleep, or wanted to make them sure that they will obey, they will use that form of saying, if you don't behave, La Llorona will come and pick you up. She is looking for her children, and she will be happy to take you. And so there's another element to this thing, is that is the cultural impact of that. The American culture, it tends to be a little bit more soothing and care and warm, and how you put your kids to sleep. And the Mexican culture, not so much. It is, you see tequila shots the same way how you treat kids, like straightforward. And so they just say, they will tell them, just go to sleep, or La Llorona will come. And then they, even some mothers would say, well, and I will not miss you. I mean, why would I want you if you continue to be like this? And so there's this really harsh treatment. And so kids, the idea of hearing a wailing, weeping women screaming for the children, or just crying for the children, knowing that she's looking for them. And if you're a child, you will be terrified, because any little moment, any little, if you hear the wind, you'll think that that's her whispering. If you hear the anxiety of losing your home, the anxiety of not being with you, the anxiety of losing your family. And so there's fear at many levels, all the way from just the experience of it to the idea of somebody taking you away, and then also drowning you. Because once you know that when she takes you, she'll kill you too, the same way as she did to her kids. And so there's a lot of different elements of this legend. Today's cultural atmosphere, like I say, when you type La Llorona, this beautiful music that talks about La Llorona. And it's interesting to see, the pre-Hispanic, meaning before the Spanish came, and then the colonial times, and then as to what we do today. Complete different takes to that. If you Google, you'll see or if you research, you'll find a lot of articles about even Americans collecting stories from multiple people, how the story is being told, and all of them from different locations, never the same location. If you have to narrow down what time came from, you just would not. So that's what I'm just breaking it up, those three segments, so it's easier to pass this legend. What is to be scared was scary. And so last night I was we are doing a ghost hunting. We did a ghost hunter investigation at the museum. And so last night they were telling me, that what is paranormal, what's real, what's not. and there's more questions than answers. And so if either you believe or not, even today you experience somebody whispering in your ear, or somebody tapping on your shoulder, just add that with the element of they're gonna take me away. I mean, this Llorona, the spirit is no a warm, caring spirit. No, this is a one that's gonna take you and you're in trouble. I mean, this is the one that is she's not a good person. She's not a good spirit. And so there's that element of that is like not just experience of paranormal, but also the idea that it's just a bad entity. You know, when in this culture you think about the devil, this is a bad entity, or the demons, the bad entity. Well, this one is right neck and neck, because it's mother. When you think about moms, you think about nurturing, warm persona, but this one is using the pain of losing the children and then transforming all those emotions into just scary, creepy way. In an area that is really human, it touches a really human element that the devil will not touch. I mean, imagine my mom. I won't say that, but imagine just the missing my mom, or the idea of the pain that that person is going through, the emotions is carrying on. And so to me, this is a very interesting legend. One, how it's been going on for centuries. I mean, Christopher Columbus came in 1492. And so if we're talking about pre-Hispanic, we're talking about, you know, be way before that. The Mayans is an example. They were, anyway, I'm not going to go to history there, but all I'm saying is that we have many different generations telling the same stories, and depending on where you are, the version is being told different. But on the bottom line, if you follow those common ground factors, is about a woman committing this crime, and her crime, the way she's paying it is to hunt children, to take them, and to constantly be living in pain.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for telling us about La Llorona. So at this point, I'd love to invite our panelists to tell us a bit more about why these stories have this staying power, you know, as you've said, Nancy, for generations, and Owen and Lauren, you know, these have been recorded and told decades, centuries. I'd love to hear. So I think, Nancy, based on what you said about La Llorona meant to scare children, I feel like I kind of want to start by also asking Owen and Lauren the sort of who, what, why of these tales. Like, who are they meant to scare? What are we meant to be afraid of? Are we meant to be afraid of trolls? Or, you know, how are we supposed to react to these stories, do you think?
Well, you mentioned trolls, so I feel like maybe I should go next. That was when I first read these stories. I translated them myself as one of my projects when I was doing my graduate work. As far as I know, these particular stories haven't been translated into English otherwise. And I was really struck by the troll portions, because that specifically, the man who has second sight says that he sees the troll run into the burial mound. Burial mounds are a practice in Iceland that predate the introduction of Christianity. So they are a physical reminder in the landscape of a very deep past, but also a past under a very different cosmological understanding of the relationship between people and earth. And you can imagine in the 1700s, it might be those places, those mounds would have a kind of a numinous or like supernatural quality to them, because they stand as witness against the new traditions, right, that people have been practicing. And so I was really taken with, this is like a medieval connection. But the more that I read them, when I was translating them, I realized that the part where nobody in the town says anything after he dies, and even when they run his rival out of town, they don't punish his rival. His rival doesn't go to jail. They don't report him to the authorities or anything like that. They just, push him out of the valley. I think that the real horror in this story, besides the physical gore of the dead bodies of the plague and the dead body of Gunnlaug, is in the idea that that society can turn a blind eye to crimes, that after the plague passes, the families come back down and they keep living like nothing happened, right? After Gunnlaug dies, everybody still has to go farm. So, and they don't talk about it anymore. And so I think the lack of resolution, the way that the story kind of just hangs in the air, that these deaths lie over the place and affect how people live there, I think is the real existential horror of this story for me.
Thank you. Owen, thoughts on the who, what, why?
Yeah, I think who scaring me as a kid. You know, but you know, the story with, you know, the wild woman, basket ogress, that's a word to say, is, you know, situated in the Pacific Northwest. I haven't really heard it outside. And, you know, I was always thinking and told as a kid, like, you know, it's preventing you from going too far into the woods. It's the idea of you have to, you know, know where you're going, because if not, someone's going to get you. And really place-based in that way of, we have so many dense forests around the Pacific Northwest. You know, you can't see forever. You know, you make one wrong turn and you're going somewhere else. The idea, you know, and bringing the hunchback, you know, someone who's disabled, you know, people often ask what that is, you know, and why that's in there, but it's, you know, kids that are being mean to other kids. You know, the kid that's disabled, you know, he can't help himself, they can't help themselves, but they're usually the one to, you know, escape and get out, because they're not being greedy. They're not trying to kill the basket woman or eat all the good fish. Ironically, I like the tail, but you know, it's the idea of, you know, being true to who you are. You know, you got to be a good role model, but you also don't go out on your own unless you know, unless you're listening, you know. In that second one I said, you know, it's the parent said, hey, don't go out there. And I've been told that too, you know, like something bad's going to happen to you, you know, watch out. And then you do it and you're like, I shouldn't have done that. And at the end of that second one, when they were roasting the basket woman, you know, I think things get lost in translation and how it's, you know, a big game of telephone, but I've heard it that way too. But they don't survive after that because they're greedy and try to kill her, but it ends there. And, you know, it's up to the reader to think, do they survive? Do they go back? And, you know, really about that greed and thinking you know everything. So, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, there's this idea, you know, even with fairy tales that many of us are familiar with, that, you know, we tell these scary stories to scare our children, right? But I think with the stories, definitely, at least that Nancy and Owen you've told, that they're meant to be teaching lessons, right? Like they're meant to teach us a lesson. And yet, even as adults, we still enjoy hearing these stories, right? Whether it's nostalgia, we can come back to why we still tell these stories, but I'm really struck by how much, you know, both of your tales are sort of that warning tale. Lauren, do you feel like yours has a warning for people who hear it, or is it just the drama of it?
I mean, certainly the drama, but I think if there is a warning in there, it's not for children, but I think it's for young men like Gunnlaug, and I think it's don't wear buttons on your shirt, like or rather, like don't give into fads, right? Don't be so superficial. And I think that all of the versions are relatively sympathetic to Gunnlaug, but I think it's, you know, who are your friends and who are your enemies? How do you really know? Because the stories themselves, they don't give a lot of the drama. They just say what happens. And there's so much to infer. When these stories are being collected in the 19th century and into the early 20th century in Iceland, the early 20th century in Iceland is a big transition from living mostly on isolated farms, maybe a couple in a valley, to moving to Reykjavik, to the capital, to the urban center. And so I do think that there may also be in here a commentary about anxiety about that shift, even earlier versions of the story, right? People in Iceland in the 19th century know that like urbanization, industrialization is coming. And I think that that change from knowing your valley and what the dangers are and where is safe and where isn't, to going to a new place. So I think there's a bit of a warning there. That would, yeah. I think it's also sad because of Gunnlaug and Solveig, you have the promise of like a future together that doesn't pan out for them. But I don't think it's so much a punishment as it is just a tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And Nancy, you talked a bit about how this is meant to be an obedience tool with La Llorona, right? A way to have children behave. Is it similarly to Owen's as well, of a fear of not leaving home? Is it a fear of being out in the dark? Or is it purely just if you misbehave, you know, she will come for you? Like, where do you feel like the essential fear is for children here?
All of it. I think that is tapping a human aspect of being always afraid of something and then targeting a weakest point and targeting us being vulnerable. I think that as a parent, I got a teenager, I'm gonna be using whatever vulnerable point I see of her to use it against her, just so I could keep her disciplined, and and in a nice way. I'm not torturing my daughter, but I'm just saying, as a mom, I'm always looking for tools. But also there is this elemental element to us as a human beings that we are afraid. I mean, can you go outside in the woods without the light and without, I mean, in my case, I'm 80% deaf, so I have hearing aids. I don't hear sounds. That just the idea of not hearing and going into the dark just absolutely drives me crazy. The unknown drives me crazy. If you're a child growing up, even as an adult, I mean, there are movies, and I think I saw one of the articles, or one of the questions in the chat, they're saying, you know, there's YouTube videos about La Llorona, and there's always this element of really scary. And yes, whoever wrote that comment, yes, there's a sad element to it. But to me, what's terrifying is not, yes, it is sad that she's heartbroken for her children, but it's that human element of just, that's creepy. That's something that you really, really essentially scared of somebody in pain and somebody who is seeking a way to cope with that. And then while parents using that as a tool to discipline the children. So I think it's a little bit of everything. It's in how intriguing the legends are, how it's been passed from one generation to the next generation, independent of where it's been told, the version changes. And then, so is the geographical component, is the intriguing element of, is it scary? And then a mom killing the kids is also a topic that we are not really talking much about it, but why would a mom kill the kids, you know? And it's something, and then as a result of that, wailing for that and weeping in such a horrendous way. Sadly, I have lost family members and losing their children. I've been hearing them how they wail out of pain. And that is one of the most, it's heartbroken, but it's one of the most terrifying, because it reminds you how fragile life is. And so to me, is like I'm hearing my aunt or my uncle crying for the children lose, on top of being trapped in that horrendous cycle, and on top of parents using that, not just parents, society, because it's not just the parents using that, it's all societies using that as a watch out, that Llorona is going to come and it's going to get you. Yeah, there's a lot of topics into just a few minutes, but yes, very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. And it seems like in all of your stories, there's both the very real human fear, right? And whether it's big and didactic, right? Of like, don't be greedy, share with everyone, but also these much larger human fears about loss, about sickness, you know, about threats from the unknown, from the dark. And yet they all have this supernatural element, right? We have trolls, we have the ogress, we have the spirit of La Llorona. And so even just adding the supernatural element gives the fear so much more weight, it feels like, right? Rather than just telling a story of a child being lost in the woods, we bring up the ogress, or we bring up the giant woman. Is she meant to be supernatural, Owen, or is she meant to be human?
Yeah, a little bit, that same kind of, I would say fluidity between, is it supernatural? Is it, real? Is it, it's up to, that individual to think, because then that's what makes it scary, Yeah.
So it taking its own sort of, well, and I feel like especially Owen and Lauren, your story is not being ended really. We don't know what happens next. And Nancy, La Llorona never ends, right? She's always still going to be there. So I think this sense of as much as we love to hear a story, we are still somewhat satisfied by the lack of a true ending, and that contributes to its fear.
Yeah, and I think is it real, is it not real, is it supernatural, is it natural? I mean, I think the fact that both of those exist simultaneously in my stories and Owen's and also in Nancy's, in the sense that, this is a crime that affects real people, but then you have this kind of supernatural. I feel like, I don't want to be like, that's the point, but I also do, because I think that people who told the story of the murder or the death or the killing of Gunnlaug, I think that they potentially don't necessarily want to reveal how they understand the killing when they're telling the story to the folklorists who are collecting it and writing it down. That I think potentially they throw out multiple reasons or multiple kind of sets of clues you can follow as an out for the folklorist or the reading audience to kind of pick what they think the right answer is, and the storyteller absolves themselves of that responsibility. I think it's also kind of a way to hint towards maybe a different understanding than one that would be socially acceptable. Like maybe it's not socially acceptable in 1875 to say there's a troll that lives in this mound and that's why this man died. But people really do believe that. So they suggest that, as part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you've mentioned, the different versions of the stories, that was sort of a question I had as well. Owen and Lauren, and Nancy, I mean, everyone's talked about how many different versions of these stories there are, and yet there still is this essential element, like is every version of the Basket Ogress about the same themes, or do you feel like different themes get brought up depending on who's telling the story? And I love, Lauren, you bringing up, there's also the element of telling it to someone else, right? To telling it to someone who perhaps is outside of the storytelling tradition, and how you might change it. So I'd love to hear more on, what changes, but what stays the same with these stories.
Yeah, I got a great story for you. So I was studying at the University of British Columbia, and I took a Kwakala class, which is the language of the Kwakwaka'wakw people on Vancouver Island. A super hard language to know. I can kind of relate it to some of the native languages I, briefly know, but, I'm throwing myself in there, new experiences. It's all great. And we get handed this story that we're all going to translate in class, and we're going line by line. And it happens to be that Zunukwa, or wild woman, or basket ogress story. So I'm sitting in their class and we're going each line, and I'm like, this is really familiar. Like, because it's all in a different language, but we're going through it in English line by line. And I'm like, hold on. Like, I know this one. And it was from the Kwakwaka'wakw people. And their kind of version is that it's a cleft palate kid, that's that disability, and he gets bullied, and they get scooped up, and he manages to get to the top and escape, and he has a knife and he cuts everyone free, and they're all like, you saved us, like, and like, thank you, and like, you mean so much more to us, like, we're sorry we bullied you like that. And if people have been to the Burke Museum, the old one, there was actually a Zunukwa, 1 second. There's actually a Zunukwa piece that was right outside the old Burke. I believe that was done by Bill Holm. So yeah, it just, comes up in different situations, and it's, I don't know if it's always a disability, but it is something that, people aren't always mindful of how, different, people are. And then that bullying that goes into that, and that potentially that person's going to save your life. So really valuing each person and each story they kind of bring to that table. But that was just so cool for me because I was reading it and I was line by line, like, I know this, and just, amazing to see that in, again, a different country, but still Northwest Coast. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can say some of the differences in the versions. Like I said, the version I told was like my own kind of smooshing together of a few of them, and I picked my favorite parts. One of the variants is much more heavy on the plague portion. And so the lead up to the killing, the 300 years before prologue, is, a good half of the story. And that really seems to be the interest of the storyteller, is the long history of death in this place, right? One of the other versions is much more interested in the fear of being watched, which I don't really think came through in my telling, but in one of the versions, Solveig has a premonition that Gunnlaug will be killed. So she has a dream that she sees him covered in blood. And then the next day, her favorite sheep has been killed and dismembered, and its body parts are everywhere. And so you kind of get this escalation as the creeping fear grows closer. So that, I think, is, and in that version, the Gunnlaug's bane, the thing that's responsible for his killing, is actually called in Icelandic an óvættur, so like a monster, whereas in some of the other variants, it says, well, and then his rival got kicked out of town, the end. Where it's heavily implied that it was a human agent. So I think we don't have access with these stories to the particular contexts of like who is telling them or why. And I do think some of it does come down to the features that the storyteller thought were interesting. And sometimes I think it really does, just like the goosebumpy feeling of being watched. But the plague one, I feel, speaks to me. I saw in the comments someone asked a question or made a comment about COVID, and I think that's why I spent so much time on that too, because thinking about the ways that our recent and our deep pasts affect our future, is a big anxiety in that version of the story.
Absolutely. And Nancy, thinking of these different versions, you said, she always loses her children. But are there different versions for how that happens or what happens to her?
One of the questions or one of the comments in the feedback is if what happens to the children, are they free? Yes, there's that common thing that once the children die, they are safe. They are not repeating the drowning constantly. So they are okay. It's just the mom who is constantly crying for the children. And there's a few weeks ago when I did that presentation, the Night of the Legends, one of the interesting things that I was doing is I was presenting each of the legends, and then I said, okay, do you know this version? And one of the first ones was La Llorona. And I said, don't tell me the story, just tell me how would she cry? And all of them, without practice, it was amazing. They all had this harmony. Ay, mis hijos, but like all of them, like it's almost like they practice, and that was interesting. And so I got that we use the same weeping, the same wailing over and over, but everything else was completely different. There were times where a person would raise their hand. Well, I know this version was saying like this. I know this version was saying like that. And so as I continue the night with multiple legends, all of them have that in common, that that they all have different versions. It's never the same. And especially the ones that are passed down to generation to generation. I mean, this room right now, if we had to tell somebody the legend that we just learned tonight, we won't be able to repeat it again exactly the same way. And so it will be some elements to it that it will be changing. And so imagine when it happens over generations. And so the location, the context, like Lauren was saying, it's the plague, COVID, like we can relate to it right now. And probably 10 years ago, we had no idea. Pandemic, oh yeah, there's something from the past that would never happen to us. And it's just not able to relate to it. But no, in my case, I had the opportunity to be presenting legends to, it was all in Spanish. And so it was not like, oh, I had to translate or I had to bring any cultural context to it. It was 100% in Spanish. And all of them, oh my gosh, it was a very interesting reaction to, one, there are some facts that stays the same. And two, a lot of them changes depending on who's telling them. And then what time frame period. Once again, we got the pre-Hispanic, the colonial, and then today. And it's just all of them with those three eras, thousands of versions. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, at this point, we have many questions from you all, which I really appreciate. And please do feel free to keep sending questions in. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we will get to as many of them as we can. So a couple of these are specific to some panelists. Some of them are wider reaching. I'll start with one that's more wider reaching that we have. Are there stories where the scary character is redeemed at the end after a process of understanding or transformation that they go through? Curious if the fear is something permanent or something we can learn to manage. So do you all know stories in similar traditions in which we learned that the thing that's scary isn't that scary after all?
I can think of a few stories in the Old Norse Icelandic corpus where the thing that is scary is rendered unscary. Not that it's revealed that it wasn't scary at all, but that it's somehow made less powerful. Some of them, I think, when I tell them now, they sound quite funny, just because it seems so odd. There's a very famous haunting from a saga where an Old Norse saga where a man, if you're angry in life, you're angry in death. And so he dies angry, and he doesn't want to share his inheritance with his children. And so when his children take over the farm, he keeps haunting the farm, and he keeps showing up and eating their food and opening the doors and getting in the way. And so they have to get their father to go to the other world. He's not supposed to be in this world anymore. And so they hire, or they call in, both a Catholic priest to come do an exorcism and a lawyer to evict him. And they do both, and he leaves. And so there's this question of like, well, which is it? Or is it the combination of them both, right? But it's taking advantage of whatever social systems you have to kind of make the scary thing not scary. If you can put it within an understandable framework, religious framework or a legal framework, then now you can understand it because you can see all around it and kind of control it better. That's not really a redeeming story, but it makes it more human scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Nancy.
And I apologize if I keep referring to the night of the legends. It's just because it's so fresh and I just saw all the different elements to it. The majority of the legends, or the most popular legends that I was researching to, and it was not my choice, it was like what it was the most popular ones were the ones that people talk most about. They were all about tragedy and love. La Llorona is one of the few ones that was very, very scary. All of them is like couples, one way or another dying, like a tragic love story. And then one way or another had that redemption of finding each other and the gods or something else, allowing them to continue to be together. And so the legends that I've been encountering in my culture, it has a pain on it. One way or another, the pain is there, either by losing the children, either by living in suffering over and over and non-stop, or either by the tragic deaths. And so I don't recall, and I'm sure there is, but all the legends are told and the research that I've done lately, all of them in one way or another, is a lot of tragic pain one way or another. And so I don't know if that would be redemption, but it's just know that's once again, you relate to that. And so either is something that you learn as a learning tool that we pass in generation to generation, or something that is physical, like in the legends that I was able to tell. There's these beautiful two volcanoes right by Mexico City. Every time you see them, you know that there's a couple. There's a couple representing on those. One volcano is on the knees and just crying for his loved one, and then the other mountain is just her not sleeping but dead, laying down with the snow on top of her. So every time you look at them, it's a reminder of that legend. And so isn't that redemption? I don't know, but I do know that it's a reminder of pain. It's a reminder of being able to connect love, tragedy, and then the scary ones. La Llorona is like always like the most basic, the one that you go to all the time. And like I say, I don't know why would that be more scary than the devil, which we do have stories, I'm sure. But seems like between the devil and La Llorona wins by far, and I don't know why. And I think that it's just that personal connection that you know what it is that you dealing with your mom and you're dealing with your children and you're dealing with something so close and personal while being extremely creepy and scary.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Owen, is the big woman ever redeemed, or?
Yeah, I don't know in that story, but one that I think people, are familiar with is the idea of Raven being a trickster. I think we see that a lot in the Pacific Northwest as, this raven, flying around you, making these sounds, especially with Native people in the Northwest, related to creation stories. But there's always a two-sided, sword with a trickster. He can trick you too. So being, on edge like that, but someone who's gifted life through, brought, the sun to the sky, like, has that power, but also like, you need to know your responsibility, as a person. And I think that becomes redeemable when you understand, how to tell these stories. And that they've been passed down through families, like, and it's not always, someone's story to tell, or it's, it takes that responsibility, which is so important. So thinking of Raven in that way as that trickster can, be that two-sided coin. Yeah, great question.
Absolutely, thank you. We have a lot of questions of people wanting more. So one question in particular, where do you recommend people go for more stories, either more stories similar to what you've told, or for more resources, and whether it's movies you'd recommend, podcasts, like where do you recommend people go to hear more stories like this and to engage with more conversations like this? Yeah, Nancy.
There are many versions of things that one, if you want a nice and simple and direct, just by children's storytelling stories. Going to the children's section, that means that the stories would be compact and direct and easy to pass it on. But then there's actually more research historian materials that are a little bit more serious and formal, and they go a lot deeper. And so they are all over the place. I mean, depending on where you go, depending on what culture you go to, there's either actual books, actual websites. I recommend first going to an internet and kind of type what is the most popular in whatever culture, get a reference, and then you dive it into a bookstore or a library and really diving into it. And then from there, really more familiarized. Once you know the context of what legend are you looking at, then, oh, is that a movie? Is that a song? Is that a podcast? Is something, can when I talk to somebody, can I go directly to the culture, meaning like somebody representing that culture? And so a lot of the stories are passed on from generation to generation. And then later on, you see the formats either in writing, on movies, or on any type of media. But to me, my recommendation is just start really simple. And then once you select one story, just dive deep into one and then continue your research.
Thank you. Other recommendations?
Yeah, I can go next. I think, well, looking up, indigenous, Northwest Coast, stories. One, indigenous people range all over the globe, so being specific in where you want to, research that. So let's say the Pacific Northwest, you look up Pacific Northwest and, native stories, and a lot of things come up of, Native people have been tokenized for so long of, making these stories, or, non-native authors, telling these stories. So I would say if you want to do that work and start to dive into that, really be mindful who's writing these stories, where those acknowledgements are. And, sometimes these stories aren't, publicly available, and that's okay. That just means you don't get access to that. It's not a bad thing. It's just, sometimes they're protected. So I would say, there's a lot of great books out there, especially UW Press does a lot of good stuff with some translators. But there's also great modern literature, contemporary literature of Native writers that bring in those traditional stories. So, seeing who exactly is writing it, and then kind of going from there, because there's a lot of stuff out there that isn't real and that's fake. So just being mindful of that. Yeah. Lauren?
I saw a movie on an airplane this summer that I liked a lot, which is a very different take, but thinking about like, are there any other, sources for Icelandic folk tales or stories, especially scary stories? There are some selected English translations of some of these collections that were produced by Jón Árnason. So John Arneson is the big name in Icelandic folklore from the 19th century. And a lot of those stories were collected from people who were living around Iceland and then have kind of been sold back to Icelanders in subsequent generations who maybe feel more disconnected from that rural past or that older way of thinking, or what people consider an older way of thinking. So it is a little odd to me sometimes when I read these stories because of how they are now like packaged and commercialized, and they are so separated from the people and the place where they were told. I think scary stories in Iceland, they use open space a lot. I think a lot of American horror films are very interested in exploring like claustrophobia and how do you get out of a small space. But Iceland, the fear is that you are exposed to the elements for too long, that you get lost in the highlands, or that you're seen by someone who is looking for you, so being out in the open. And I saw a film this summer that came out last year by an Icelandic director. In the English title is Lamb, like a baby sheep, lamb. And in Icelandic, the title is Dýrið, the animal. And it's a story about grief and loss and family that takes place on an Icelandic farm in the contemporary. And it just had so many long shots of just the open, flat land that feels, I think, existentially unsettling in a way that I think matches maybe the tone of the story that I picked for tonight.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you all so much. We have a really big one, so I'm gonna take us into taking it beyond these stories. But we have the question, why do you all think we tell these stories? Why do we keep telling scary stories? And our audience member has written, they can keep us up at night. So it seems sort of unusual that we're still attracted to them and entertain ourselves and one another with fear, which under most circumstances we would avoid, but with stories, it's different. So your perspective on that, why do we keep coming back to these scary stories when we don't like scary? Nancy.
Since I've been starting, so I'm just gonna let the rotations continue. That's what I did last night. I was doing this interview with the ghost hunters at the museum, and we've been collecting our collections for more than 25 years. And so it's just a lot of how can we explain all these incidents that happened to my volunteers. And so I'm right in the middle, don't know how to take it, but knowing how my volunteers and everyone that was in the museum is reacting to it, like, okay, this is something funny. Let's just see for real if we can have an investigation and see what happens. And as I'm sharing to people around me that we are doing this, either partnerships or funders or the different partnerships that we get in contact, community members, students, members, they all seems to be really intrigued. Like, tell me more. Like, well, it's scary. I mean, imagine going to the collections and you being alone, and tell me more. And so there is this human element to all of us, is to be intrigued by something that, intrigued by something. It could be very scary, it could be something that is just curious, could be something that I don't understand it, I don't believe in this, but I'm curious. But since you're little, I think that's one of the things that I see as a common ground for all of us as humans. We like to tell scary stories to little ones. We like to continue. We like to explore the paranormal. We like to continue. Is this real? Is this possible? And then when you mix up with your own values and your own beliefs and the traditions that have been passed on to you, you just combine it. It's like a big giant smoothie of many different factors. But to me, I just see it so between the legends and how people are reacting with the ghost investigation. And there are different topics, but it's still, even the cultures, even the language, even the settings are different. And it's still, we have this fascination about, tell me more about this. Tell me more about this area. One of the questions that on the chat that I saw was about translations. And the three of us, one way or another, we're dealing with translations. Is that make an impact on how we tell the stories? And absolutely. I don't know how to, I don't think I'm being fair in how I'm telling this story based on how it was told to me and how I grew up with that. And so here I am, even La Llorona. I mean, I keep saying La Llorona because that's how I learned it, to call it the weeping women. That takes away, that strips down what that is for me. And so, yes, absolutely, it makes an impact in translations and finding the right terms and finding the right social context to translate not just the term, but everything else around it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Owen.
Yeah, I think, definitely, it is not the same as that original, language, especially because there's so many words that, English can't translate. And that you can't get that sense, maybe of that adrenaline or that fear or that suspense that we all crave, and that's why we tell those stories. Nancy, said it, perfectly, is that curiosity. It's that wanting more. And, I think a good outlook on it too is that as an adult, you want to tell those stories to your kids. It's that cyclical relationship that, you're scaring your kids and you can say you like it, because it's teaching that lesson and it's, reminding you when you were that kid. So I think that hunger for those scary stories, is nostalgia, but it's also, what else can I think about, and some people really don't like it, but, I think for all of us here, it's that, just what's next and what else can I think of and where can I question that? So yeah, Lauren.
I think I like Nancy's word curiosity, saying, oh, and you wanting more. I think for me, it's like you're sharing a secret. Scary stories, you only tell them at certain times of year, you only tell them at certain times of the day. So they're very auspicious in that sense. Like they mean something is happening that's very important, and the storyteller gets to, is in complete control of the pacing of the narrative, and you're the one kind of dispensing the knowledge. And so I think it's sharing a secret, it's creating a relationship, and I think it feels very intimate in ways that other kinds of stories maybe don't, because you're in the room together. I'm here, we're all on screen together, but you're making something, you're making each other feel a different way. And I think that's a very human to human connections.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, and I wanted to open it up to you three based on any questions you've seen in the chat that you've been waiting for me to bring up, or anything that you felt a sort of burning desire to make sure it got said in response. Yeah, Nancy, and I'll give you all sort of a moment to look over those questions as well. But Nancy, go ahead.
There's one that says, question for me, if it's a Llorona movie that I like. There's quite a few and great ratings. I'll be honest with you, I've never seen or watched any of the La Llorona movies. I'm not interested, and I know it's a very personal decision. I think that it doesn't compare to the storytelling from one generation to the next. I mean, that to me, that somebody telling you that story has more impact, and then also growing with it and then being afraid of it for such a long time, for many years. I think that I'm good with that at my level, but I can see my daughter being fascinated by it, and then just going in there and trying to look into more of the movies. No, I never watched that, but to me it's because of the power of somebody telling me that, and then the power of living through that culture of being afraid. For me, once again, I use hearing aids, and so I was go to sleep without hearing, and I go to sleep without hearing. I do that every night anyways. And so when you turn off the light and you don't hear, it is this horrendous anxiety, and if you got this entity that's going to come and get you, it's something that I really don't crave to even see in a movie. I think my imagination is more powerful than what I've already seen in the movie. And so that is one of the things that I just saw there in the chat.
Thank you so much. Other questions you wish to answer, Owen or Lauren?
I want Owen to talk about his background.
Yeah, so this is, someone commented about this. This is at Hibbolb at the Tulalip Cultural Center. I took this photo. And I often use this background when I'm telling stories or engaging with people. I'm inviting you into this longhouse, and that's where we tell our stories. And we usually tell our stories in the winter. So bringing you into here and, try to smell the smoke, and those feelings and that cedar. So just bringing that ambiance here. Yeah. Thanks, Lauren.
Fantastic. And Lauren, completely fine if not, but I wanted to make sure you got an opportunity to say anything else about your tales that people were asking.
I did see one question about Easter and why it's significant that he goes out the night before Easter. And it just makes me think about the differences between like majoritarian American culture around holidays versus, later medieval, early modern attitudes towards holidays in Iceland and Scandinavia, that holidays are often scary times. Like we celebrate a lot of holidays in majoritarian, settler colonial American tradition, where it's like a fun time with family, but a lot of holidays in Scandinavian traditions are like the spirits are out and some of them are bad, and so we stay in with each other, so we don't go out there, don't go out alone, to echo something Owen shared about the lesson of his story. And a lot of stories around Christmas are like this, that Christmas is the darkest time of year in Scandinavia, and that's when the spirits come out, that's when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. And I think the night before Easter, Gunnlaug is excited for the return of Christ, that he has his benefactor will protect him, but he's not quite back yet. So he's still in that liminal zone of like, this is actually a very dangerous time to be out, because the Christian God is actually dead traditionally at this moment. So he doesn't have anyone watching out for him. And so he gets then attacked by one of the spirits of the land, which, I mean, I think is very much later Christian attitudes towards pre-Christian past in Iceland.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I see that someone has submitted a resource on how to learn more about why we crave scary stories. So I am going to share that as a question. And I also just wanted to say some of you may be here tonight due to the Humanities Challenge, which is something that Humanities Washington has put together, that each week you will engage with a different challenge, asking you to ponder a different question about humanity or have a different experience. So this week in the Humanities Challenge, we are questioning why we tell these scary stories, why do we like to be afraid? And we do invite all of you to consider what scary stories you grew up with, right? I saw people in the chat saying, you know, this is really similar to Grimm, or this is really similar to a tale that I heard from China. So we do invite you to continue this conversation with each other, the people you're watching with, the people who you'll see tomorrow. Keep asking, you know, why do we tell these stories? I loved the theme of curiosity that came up tonight. I feel like that's such an inherently human trait. And so if we have this curiosity and how it gets tied to storytelling, we really kind of are at this sort of crux of humanity. So I'll share the article from Stephen King as well that someone submitted. And one of the resources we sent out with the Humanities Challenge was more reading on theory behind why we like these scary stories. So we definitely invite you, encourage you to keep the story going. And at this point, we're at 8:29. So I would like to, once again, huge thank you so much, Nancy, Owen, Lauren, for your incredible tales and for your incredible, generous thoughts on why we tell scary stories. And a huge thank you to you all as well for being here tonight. Please continue this conversation. Let us know what you think. Tomorrow, or by the end of the week at least, you'll get an email from me saying thank you for being here. Perhaps some of these resources, you know, Lamb, the movie Lamb, and a couple other things that we could maybe send out to you all. And the opportunity to let us know what you thought about this program and how you might continue thinking about it in the future. So if you're interested in more of our programs, again, you can find us at humanities.org. And I'll end the night by saying happy Halloween. And I hope you all have a fantastic time. I hope you all can sleep tonight. So thank you again so much, Nancy, Owen, and Lauren.
Thank you, everybody.